The sun beat down, a hammer of relentless heat on the parched earth. Dust devils danced on the horizon, mocking phantoms in the shimmering air. He rode low in the saddle, a man carved from the same sun-blasted landscape, his face a roadmap of hard miles and harder truths. They called him different things in different places, whispers of capability and a past best left undisturbed. Today he was just a man on a horse, tracking a silence that felt wrong. Not the silence of the empty plains, but a deeper, violated quiet. He found them huddled in the meager shade of an overhang, 5 figures against the rock face, blending into the grit and despair. Even from a distance, something was terribly, viscerally wrong. Their heads were bare, the skin unnaturally pale where hair should have been, brutally shorn. As he drew closer, dismounting slowly, deliberately, he saw the markings. Crude, stark letters daubed in something dark and rusty against their skin. Sinning rats, one on each forehead, another across a cheekbone, a throat. The color was undeniably blood, dried and caked. They flinched as he approached, recoiling like startled rabbits, but made no sound. Their eyes, wide and hollow, were fixed on him, a mixture of terror and a desolate apathy that chilled him more than any scream. They were young, teenagers, barely on the cusp of womanhood, stripped bare of more than just their hair. Shame and violation clung to them like the dust. One girl, the oldest perhaps, no more than 17, met his gaze for a fraction of a second before her eyes dropped, fixing on the ground. Her jaw was set, a flicker of something beneath the fear, defiance, perhaps, or just bone-deep weariness. She had the mark across her temple, partially obscured by the angle of her head. He didn't speak. Words felt useless, profane, against the scale of this quiet atrocity. He moved slowly, uncinching his saddlebag. He took out a canteen, knelt a few feet away, and placed it gently on the sand. He added a pouch of jerky. He didn't push them, didn't crowd their fragile space. He just waited, his presence a heavy question mark in the oppressive heat. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. He watched the oldest girl. Her gaze flickered towards the canteen, then back to her companions, a silent calculation in her eyes. The others remained frozen, statues of fear. He knew this look. He'd seen it in hunted animals, in people who had seen the worst of humanity. It was the look of souls pushed beyond the edge of sound. He sat back on his heels, allowing them the space they desperately needed, the vast, indifferent sky his only witness. He remained there for a long time, a silent sentinel. The sun began its slow descent, painting the rocks in hues of orange and purple. Still, they did not move. The water remained untouched. The jerky lay beside it, a promise of substance they seemed unable to grasp. He didn't try to coax them. He understood the paralysis of terror, the way it could root you to the spot, make the simplest action an insurmountable task. The oldest girl shifted slightly. Her eyes, still downcast, darted towards the canteen again. He saw the slight tremor in her hand, resting on the sand. It wasn't fear now, but the shaking of exhaustion, of hunger and thirst denied for too long. He rose slowly, not looking directly at them, and walked a short distance away, towards his horse. He busied himself checking the saddle, adjusting a strap, anything to give them the illusion of privacy, of not being watched, though he was acutely aware of their presence. He listened to the silence, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, he heard a faint scraping sound. He didn't turn. He heard a soft, choked sob quickly stifled. Then, the unmistakable sound of water being poured. He gave them time, measured in the lengthening shadows. He didn't intrude. When he finally turned back, cautiously, they were drinking, slowly, carefully, sharing the water. The oldest girl held the canteen, offering it to the others with a quiet intensity. The jerky remained untouched. Food was perhaps a step too far, too normal, in a world that had been brutally redefined as anything but. He walked back, stopping a few feet away. He needed to move them. Night was falling, and the desert held its own dangers beyond cruel men. But how to move creatures so fragile, so deeply wounded, without shattering them completely. He looked at the markings again. The sheer, casual malice of it stole his breath for a second. Who would do this? And why leave them? He didn't need the answers now. He needed to get them somewhere safe. "We need to move," he said finally, his voice low, rough, and used to gentle tones. It was the first sound, save for their choked sobs and the rustle of their clothes, that had broken the silence in hours. The oldest girl looked up at him, her eyes questioning, still wary, but with a flicker of something else. Not quite trust, not yet, but perhaps a desperate recognition that he was not the ones who had done this. The journey was slow, agonizingly so. The girls were weak, their small bodies trembling with exertion and residual fear. He set a careful pace, leading his horse, allowing them to walk behind him, a silent, watchful presence. He didn't push, didn't command. He simply moved forward, an anchor in their chaotic, terrifying world. The oldest girl, whose name he still didn't know, walked closest to him, her eyes occasionally lifting to study his back, his movements, his quiet competence. She didn't speak, nor did the others. The silence was punctuated only by their ragged breathing and the soft scrape of their worn boots on the sandy ground. He found a small, hidden alcove beneath some rocks just as the last light faded. It offered a degree of shelter, a sense of being less exposed to the vast, indifferent night sky. He built a small fire carefully shielded from the wind. The flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to chase away some of the darkness, both outside and within the girl's hollowed eyes. He shared the meager contents of his saddlebag, hardtack, more jerky. He tore pieces for them, handing them out one by one. The oldest girl took hers with a hesitant hand, watching his face for any sign of expectation or threat. There was none, only a quiet, unwavering patience. She ate slowly, chewing deliberately, as if rediscovering the process. The others followed suit, tentative, watchful. He didn't ask them about the markings, about what had happened. The wounds were too fresh, too deep for interrogation. He knew such things couldn't be forced. They would speak if and when they could. His focus was on the immediate warmth, a little food, a feeling of temporary safety. He cleaned a small length of cloth from his pack and dipped it in his canteen. He hesitated for a moment, looking at the oldest girl. The sinning rats glared starkly from her temple. "You should clean those," he said, his voice softer this time. He offered her the damp cloth. She stared at it for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the dark stains on her skin. The shame seemed to radiate from her, a palpable weight. Then, slowly, her hand reached out and took the cloth. Her fingers trembled as she raised it to her temple. She hesitated again, her eyes squeezing shut for a second, bracing herself. Then, with a quiet resolve that surprised him, she began to rub at the mark. It didn't come off easily. It was caked and stubborn. The motion was almost ritualistic, a silent battle against the violation etched onto her skin. The other girls watched her, their expressions mirroring her inner struggle. One by one, they reached up and touched their own markings, their faces a mask of pain and tentative hope. He watched her, a knot tightening in his chest. He had seen suffering, had inflicted some himself in his life, but this was a level of depravity that scraped at the foundations of his own hard-won stoicism. He looked away, giving her that crucial privacy, that moment to reclaim a sliver of herself. He added more wood to the fire, the crackling sound filling the quiet. He thought about the kind of men who would do this, who would brand young girls like cattle, stripping them of their dignity and leaving them to die. Anger, cold and sharp, stirred within him. But anger wouldn't help these girls. Only quiet persistence, patience, and a steady hand would. He glanced back. The oldest girl was still rubbing, tears tracking paths through the dust on her cheeks, mixing with the streaks of blood. The mark was fading, smearing, but fading nonetheless. It was a start. Painful, necessary start. He knew this journey was far from over. Days blurred into a quiet, measured rhythm dictated by the sun and their fragile needs. They moved during the cooler parts of the day, rested during the heat. He taught them how to find water in unexpected places, how to identify edible roots, how to move silently through the landscape. He taught them not with lectures, but by doing, his actions a silent language of survival. The girls watched, absorbed, slowly beginning to shed the paralyzing fear that had gripped them. The oldest girl, he learned her name was Eleanor, became their quiet leader. She was the first to ask a question, her voice hesitant but steady. Where are we going? He had paused, looking out at the vast, empty plains stretching before them. Somewhere safe, he finally replied. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was the truth. Safe was a relative term out here, but safer than where they'd been. He saw the trust in her eyes grow infinitesimally with each passing day, built on the simple, undeniable fact that he was protecting them, providing for them, expecting nothing in return. The marks on their skin were fading, slowly. They had scrubbed at them whenever they had water, a silent, shared act of defiance against their past. The raw skin beneath was tender, but the visual horror was receding, replaced by the resilience hardening in their gazettes. One evening, huddled around the fire, a different kind of silence fell. Not the silence of fear, but of shared experience, of tentative peace. Eleanor spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. They said we were wicked. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. The other girls shifted, their eyes downcast. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to know the specifics of the cruelty. He knew the result. You're not wicked, he said simply, meeting her gaze. You're survivors. It was the longest sentence he'd spoken to them, and it seemed to unlock something. Another girl, smaller and younger, began to cry softly, the tears flowing freely this time, not in terror, but in a release of pent-up sorrow. Eleanor reached out and took her hand. He saw the strength in Eleanor, the quiet fire that had been banked but not extinguished. He began to show her more the practical skills he knew, how to read the tracks of animals, how to orient herself by the stars, how to handle his rifle. Not to make her a warrior, but to make her capable, to give her the tools to protect herself and the others. He saw the hunger for knowledge in her eyes, the fierce determination to never be helpless again. The sinning rats were fading, but the memory of the cruelty would remain. Yet, he saw something new emerging in its place. Resilience forged in the fire of suffering, dignity quietly reclaimed. He wasn't saving them. He was equipping them to save themselves. They reached a small, isolated settlement, little more than a few scattered cabins and a general store clinging to the edge of the territory. It wasn't much, but it was a place with people, with laws however flimsy. He had spoken to Eleanor before they arrived. You tell them what you want to tell them, he'd said. You're not beholden to anyone's story but your own, she had nodded, her jaw set, the markings on her temple now barely visible scars on her skin. He watched from a distance as Eleanor, standing a little taller than she had when he found her, spoke to the sheriff, her voice clear and steady, despite the tremor in her hands. The other girls huddled behind her, still fearful, but drawing strength from her quiet courage. He didn't stay long enough to become involved, didn't need the questions his presence would inevitably raise. His part was done. He had found them, given them water, food, shelter, and the start of the long road back to themselves. He rode away, leaving them in the hands of others, in the uncertain embrace of civilization. He glanced back once. He saw Eleanor look in his direction, her gaze finding him even at the distance. She didn't wave, didn't call out. They simply acknowledged each other, a silent understanding passing between them across the dusty ground, the rescuer and the rescued who had found her own strength. The marks were gone, or nearly so, but the resilience was indelible, etched into their spirits deeper than any blood could mark their skin. They were no longer sinning rats. They were survivors. They were girls who had been broken and were slowly, painstakingly, piecing themselves back together, and in Eleanor, he had seen the quiet, powerful dawn of their reclaiming their dignity. He rode on, back into the vast, empty country, the silence no longer one of despair, but of possibility.